People's Platform. Freedom of expression is not just a principle, it's not just a concept. People think of it lightly as long as they have access to that freedom, but the minute that they lose it, they understand the importance, they understand the value of it. Good evening and welcome. This is the People's Platform. Of course, in Sri Lanka, we've enjoyed a certain level of freedom of expression that has suffered towards the latter part of the past few years. However, Sri Lankans continue to press on, demanding for their freedom of expression, for them to express their rights, their views to be protected. And at the forefront of this fight, of course, is Sri Lanka's civil society, several government organizations also, including the Human Rights Commission. Today, joining us on our discussion is Attorney at Law Migara Doss, who has been doing just that for quite some time now. Although he looks young, he has a few years under his belt. A very good evening, Migara, and welcome to the show.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Migara, now, starting off, of course, there are questions as to the legitimacy of this government, as to whether or not they enjoy the people's mandate, so on and so forth. However, this government has done a certain amount of work to bring some sort of stability to Sri Lanka. And it is the view of the government, and it was enunciated by the Minister of Justice, no less, today, that the government plans on bringing the Anti-Terrorism Act and also the Online Safety Bill as means, of course, to control society, to bring prosperity to Sri Lanka, to bring development to Sri Lanka. Now, I know from the get-go that you are heavily against these ideas, but there was an Aragalia in Sri Lanka, there was massive unrest in Sri Lanka, a parliamentarian died, of course. These are not, well, ideal ways to deal with a crisis within a democracy. So, do you think, or are you of the stance that these arguments propounded by the government have no merit whatsoever?
I think so, Shalin, for several reasons. Now, as you said, we have a government since 2020. But in 2022, what we experienced was the cabinet of ministers resigned twice. The prime minister resigned and the president resigned, and a new president was appointed by parliament. So there was always the question of mandate, whether this government has the mandate to implement these far-reaching changes that they've been proposing and putting on the table all these years. So now the latest development here which we experience is, as you correctly said, the Anti-Terrorist Act. Now there are arguments on part of the government that to maintain stability, to maintain the journey towards prosperity, there needs to be some sort of control. But we've had a Prevention of Terrorism Act since 1979 as a temporary measure. And we've had horrendous experience under that. And right now, there was so many criticism against abolishing this act. And to move forward in a more democratic and in a manner that respects human rights. Now, we have on the table the Anti-Terrorism Act. What is the problem with this? How does it define the act of terrorism in this act? That is the main issue. According to the Anti-Terrorism Act, Shalan, it defines terrorism in such a broad way where any person who does an act or mission and compels the state to do or not do anything, and in the process, if there's disruption of essential services, public property, or public peace, that would amount to an act of terrorism according to this act.
So, Migara, you are speaking about the amended version of the Anti-Terrorism Act, because there was one initially brought back in March, I believe, that was withdrawn shortly afterwards. Then there's a new one brought, and it's the opinion of the Minister of Justice that this has substantial changes. And you're speaking about this new act or the new bill that was published in the Gazette quite recently.
In September 2023, and according to that, the definition has not changed one bit. Now, the issue with this definition is, in terms of global standards, to define terrorism, there should be a specific definition of terrorism. According to global standards, when there are acts of killing people or taking people in hostage with the intention of creating a terrorist state, that is defined as terrorism. But here, the broad definition afforded to terrorism, where any trade union or any activist that challenges the government, and once they challenge the government, if there's a disruption of peace, if there's a disruption of essential services, this can happen even over a trade union strike, even over a protest movement. So these people who are certainly not with the intention of creating a terrorist state would be labeled as terrorism, and they will be imprisoned for indefinite periods of time. So that is the actual danger behind this new law.
But then, Migara, now you're saying that if this law is brought, anyone can be branded as a terrorist, anyone can be arrested. Does that mean to say that the existing Prevention of Terrorism Act does not provide for the same framework? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the president of the Inter-University Student Federation, Vasantha Mudalige, was arrested under the PTA. He was imprisoned for several months. He lost several months of his youth. So, what's the difference?
Not only that, I think not only Vasantha Mudalige, but we've also had activists and lawyers who were imprisoned under the PTA. So what the government did in
Hijaz
Hizbullah, and what the government did in turn was they gave undertakings to the UN Human Rights Council that they will improve this law in a manner that there will be no further shortcomings of this sort. But what do we have right now? This would broaden the definition of terrorism and would cast a net on entire society, where even the slightest democratic activism would be labeled as terrorism. I'll tell you a very recent example. The CEB, the electricity trade unions, launched a protest movement and a trade union action very recently regarding the proposed proposals to privatize CEB. So that is their democratic right and constitutional right. The minister responded saying, all those who are involved in the trade union action will be suspended. That is, as of now, under a law of this nature, they can be branded as terrorists and even imprisoned. So that is the danger of the situation that we are looking forward at.
Or even their trade union could be prescribed by the president himself.
Certainly.
And there is nothing that anyone can do about it.
There's nothing that anyone can do about it. Even more dangerously now, under the previous PTA, detention orders could be issued by the Minister of Defence. Now this ATA bill provides for detention orders to be issued by a DIG. So we know.
But for a shorter period though, 1 month.
For 2 months. For 2 months.
I believe that's been reduced to 1 month.
2 months.
2 months.
2 months.
Okay.
Earlier it was 3 months.
Okay.
So the issue with this is there will be a selective application of these provisions. Now, basically, this will not be used to curb terrorism. For instance, as you said, very correctly said, we have seen the kinds of Vasantha Mudalige being arrested, Hijaz Hizbullah being arrested. But there were 14 arrest warrants against Zaharan Hashim. PTA didn't get enforced against him. In 1982, after 1979 PTA came into force, Velupille Prabhakaran was arrested in Chennai by the Indian government. It was not invoked. So this is always focusing on activists and political dissent. So it will be an ideal hammer for the government to curb political dissent in the future.
Moving on, there is also another piece of legislation that has caused quite a controversy. This is the Online Safety Bill. Now, the short title of this bill, of course, is promising to say the least. I mean, who wouldn't want their safety to be ensured online? But is that what this bill really provides for? This bill was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court proposed several amendments to many of the provisions in this bill. However, the government also seems to want to pursue with the bill because in Parliament, the Speaker said that the Supreme Court has given the nod that this can be passed by a simple majority subject to the amendments to the original draft that was made by representations were made by the Attorney General to the Supreme Court are made according to the recommendation of the Supreme Court.
I think firstly, Shalan, what we should understand is when a bill is being challenged before the Supreme Court is vested with the limited task of ascertaining the constitutionality of that bill. But the political and social implications would not come under that purview. But now, as you said, anyone wouldn't object to a online safety bill. We know basically our daily functionings are based on the online platforms. So the issue is we face many issues and many problems through online platforms and our daily dealings. So why wouldn't we control it? Now, this is the basis why the government is bringing this law. This is what they call it. Well, this also happened in Bangladesh. Bangladesh also proposed an Online Safety Act. They also said that online platforms should be monitored and there should be proper supervision and all that. But after 3 years, it had been the complete opposite, where this Online Safety Bill was used to curb free speech, completely suppress free speech. And after 3 years, there have been series of arrests carried out in terms of the Online Safety Bill in Bangladesh, and over 70% of them are journalists. So that is the actual danger that we will face here. We might not have the luxuries of an American or UK system. We might head towards a Bangladeshi catastrophe of a bill of this kind.
And once this bill is, of course, passed into law, changing it is not going to be easy, is it?
Certainly not. I mean, if you look at this bill, there are basically draconian provisions in that. So it basically proscribes or prohibits certain kinds of statements. One would be if a false statement creates hostility between two classes of people. Now, that again is a very broad definition. If we criticize the political culture, the political elite, one can come and complain and say, our feelings are hurt and there's hostility between the ordinary people and us. And also it provides for an offense where a false statement could result in the possibility of a riot, not an actual riot to happen. But if there's a possibility of a riot happening through a statement, that would be a proscribed statement and punishable by law. So the issue is, who decides this? This is decided by a commission that is appointed by the president. The president appoints the commission, the chairman, the president can even remove members from the commission.
But now the president has included provisions to say that the Constitutional Council can vet it.
So we also have experienced this situation as of recent, how the president can have his way in any constitutional setup. We saw it with the appointment of the acting IGP as well. So I think there's a strong hold by the president over this commission. As, for example, in the 1997 Sri Lanka Broadcasting Authority Bill, the courts held that the minister's powers are too exorbitant and basically it should be it is constitutionally invalid because of that reason alone. So the president here once again holds substantial powers to appoint members, chairman, and even remove them. Of course, subject to the Constitutional Council's approval. But we've seen the practice.
Migara, speaking in Parliament recently, since you brought up the appointment of the Acting Inspector General of Police, parliamentarian Rohita Begunawardhan, a former minister, said that it's because of the Araga layer that this country is in this position, a statement that he has reiterated time and time again. And he went on to praise, of course, the Yukti operation that is currently it's taking place in Sri Lanka, of course, to nab drug peddlers, as the police would put it. And he also went on to make a statement saying that it is the supporters of the Araga layer who don't want operations like the Yukti operation to nab drug dealers and laws like the online safety bill that would ensure the safety of people in Sri Lanka to be brought. How would you respond to that?
I think the political elite of our country have a serious grudge against the civil activism that took place in 2022. I think the main reason for that is there are existing political privileges and the political positions they held were challenged by the people. I think obviously because the people were deprived of their basic needs, but then again there was also a deep message coming through the Araga layer where the political culture which we experienced and the political elite that experiences all privileges at our expense, that the people would not stand for it anymore and that the people would not hesitate to challenge it. So I think it is that grievance that these members of the political elite have against people's uprisings. And again, speaking of the Yukti Mehuma, it is not us, but the Supreme Court, right after his appointment, gave a judgment on a fundamental rights matter that he had been found guilty for torturing a person. And right afterwards, we saw what happened in the Valigam incident. The police had gone and shot at a hotel, and then the police had come from the Valigam police and shot back at them. And then this is an instance of clear negligence, if negligence or an intentional action of unleashing violence on people. So basically the Yukti Mehuma, whatever they say it is.
However, in all fairness to the police department, the official statement by the police was that there was some form of miscommunication that resulted in the shootout and the unfortunate death of one police officer.
That is certainly correct, Sean, and our sympathies are with those whose lives were lost. But what we should not forget is there is a circular issue during the previous IJP's period. When a particular police station or unit carries out a mission in a given area, they should inform the police units of that particular area. So this was not done. So why didn't they do it? Why didn't they do it, and why didn't they say that they are from the police? Why did they fire back? Why was there a shootout between two people? Why didn't they go to the hospital? Why were they trying to exit from the highway? So these questions, I think, beg serious answers from the police department and, of course, the acting IGP.
Of course, the official statement again on why they did not directly go to the hospital and instead opted to put onto the highway and get back to Colombo all the way from the south was because they wanted to admit the police officer to a hospital in Colombo. And with that, we'll cross over to a short commercial break and be back with more. Stay tuned. You're watching The People's Platform.
The People's Platform.
TV1. TV for life.
US and UK strike Houthi targets as Israel-Hamas war rages. Is Sri Lanka's involvement in the Red Sea crisis necessary? We never said the country was bankrupt. We only said we cannot service selected debt, says Finance Secretary. What is happening with regard to Kehelia? SJB questions the CID. Sri Lanka's anti-terrorism bill challenged in the Supreme Court. Inland Revenue Department collects highest ever tax revenue in 2023 with a record 1,550 billion rupees. SLPP's alleged Partygate criticised in Parliament.
TV1. TV for life.
අභිමන් කොහෙද මේ අයියෝ මට කතා කරේ නැත්තේ
මං හිතුවා ආමඩ කතා කරා කියලා.
කුරුළු හරිම අහිංසකයි කියලා මං හිතුවා. ඇත්ත කුරුළු ඊට වඩා හුඟක් වෙනස්.
ඔයාගේ අලුත් ජීවිතේ ගොඩනගා ගන්න ඔයාට ඕන විදිහට වෙනස් වෙන්න. හැබැයි මන් දන්නේ නැහැ අභිමන් ඔයාගේ වෙනස මට දරා ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයිද කියලා.
නීල පබලු අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
So these are the three industries that, very interestingly, the industries that brings in dollars to this country, right? The tea, the garment and the migrant workers.
There was a time when the plantation child was seen as a child who was groomed to be a domestic worker. But then things have really changed.
When one domestic worker migrates, I think an employer pays to almost 800,000 to 1 million rupees for one domestic worker.
Not only participation, becoming politician, but also exercising your voting rights as a citizen of the country.
Creating public awareness is one of the important things that could happen. And then the workers need to be organized, and then facilities given for them to sort of organize themselves and demand for their rights.
Face the Nation, Wednesday nights at 9:30 on TV1. නව වසරක්, නව නායකත්වයක්, නව ජයග්‍රාහී ගමනක්. ශ්‍රී ලංකා සිම්බාබ්වේ එක්දින සහ T20 ක්‍රිකට් තරගාවලිය. ජනවාරි 6 වෙනිදා සිට 18 වෙනිදා දක්වා පිටිය වටකොට නැගෙන ජයගොස සජීවීව විඳින්න. TV1 නාලිකාව සමග රැඳෙන්න.
If the people of this country still opt to vote for the Rajapaksas and the SLPP, then we have very, very little hope.
Sri Lanka has a unique position of being the absolute last in the world in terms of revenue to GDP.
You need to get rid of corruption, then only we can think about at least some rationale in the development of a country.
As a party, we are planning to organize a lot of protest campaign and some meetings and demonstrations, all kind of things from January.
When the purchasing power, what we call the aggregate demand, goes down, it will have a negative impact in the economy as well.
Face to Face, Newsfirst political talk show, Monday to Friday at 8 p.m. on TV1.
People's Platform.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching the People's Platform. We're in discussion with Attorney at Law Migara Doss, of course, about some of the most fundamental rights that Sri Lankans are currently facing a crisis in, or the fundamental rights of the general public are in jeopardy on these matters. Migara, we were speaking about, several pieces of legislation that the government proposes to pass. Now, as I said at the beginning of this program, there is an issue on the legitimacy of the government with everything that happened in 2022, but we cannot disregard the real possibility of pieces of legislation like the Online Safety Bill and the Anti-Terrorism Act being passed in Sri Lanka's parliament. For example, Sri Lankan parliament passed the Port City Commission Bill in a matter of 3 days. So my question to you, Migara, is you are now outspoken, you speak out against ministers, you speak out against the government, you are engaged in your civil activism movement, fulfilling your civic duties as you see fit. But if these acts are passed, and given the fact that you're an attorney and you understand the exact provisions and consequences in these acts, how would this affect your contribution to the development of Sri Lanka?
I think, Sheldon, we have to look at it from a bigger picture now. This year, this coming year, is set to be an election year. So during election period at the time where the people become most politically literate and also they are politically outspoken. It is the time where parties come out to the open and discuss their policies. It is also the time the people get an opportunity to question and criticize the existing governments, existing leaders for their past 5 years in power. So this is an extremely politically volatile situation. So in such a situation, people are outspoken, and that is the reason why this government wants to curb their rights, curbing the rights by the ATA, curbing the rights by the OSB, and so on, and also other law enforcement mechanisms. So your question is, how do we face this? We face this situation right throughout. I think not us, but people before us, generations before us, have always faced these kinds of situations. So I think one issue would be, one way to cope with this would be, there are commissions like the Human Rights Commission. Whenever people are arrested without a lawful cause, whenever they are persecuted, the Human Rights Commission has a role to play, because Sri Lankan government has signed international covenants to respect and give due regard to the political and civil rights of the people. So I think that is the path, and that is our safe spot if these acts are passed.
But if is this safe spot really safe?
That is subject to test, I think, subject to test in the future. I think these governments are proposing these laws with a clear intention. They want to go ahead with their policies. They want to keep holding on to power. So I think that is why they want to crush dissent and suppress any form of free speech that would threaten their authority. So I think Sri Lanka and the people of Sri Lanka has faced these challenges before as well. I think starting from the 80s or 1994 onwards, or during 2009 onwards, people have gone through many hardships, but they've always come out strong. So I think we will have to keep our faith and hope for the best, and we would have to keep our hope on the people of Sri Lanka that they will come out of this as well.
Well, Migara, we weren't quite around when, I know that I wasn't around when the JVP riots took place. Were you around?
No, I was not.
You weren't around, okay. So just a study of what really happened during that period is that there were many incidents that took place, but chief among them was that a political party was banned, their right to express their political views was neglected, was constrained, and that led to an outright, almost civil war in Sri Lanka. Do you see these pieces of legislation, of course, creating maybe a lead up to such a catastrophe in Sri Lanka? Because how things can turn around, how fast things can turn around. In 2020, leader of the SJB, Sajith Premadasa, and Dr. Harsha De Silva said that we are heading to a serious catastrophe, go to the IMF. The government laughed it off. Today, we are bankrupt. So do you think this would maybe help lead the way to such destruction in the country?
I don't want to make any predictions, Shalan, but as you said very correctly, the more the people are suppressed, more their rights are suppressed, more there is a chance for them to rise up against them, as we have experienced in this country when political parties are banned, when people are put in jail, when political leaders are put in jail. People always fight against that. I think that is always in the spirit of the Sri Lankan citizenry. So I think the government also should learn from history and not make mistakes that were made in the past. So I think respect for human rights and democracy is the foundation of a society. I think it should be so, and if they are not trying to honor these valued principles, it will be quite unfortunate for the people and this country at whole.
But Migara, if the general public can really understand this, and it's a very simple deduction to come to this conclusion, why do you think the government doesn't care about it?
I think government, the existing political culture is always about maintaining the political elite of this country. So, for example, when you see the people are taxed in terms of the VAT, and also direct taxes are imposed on them. But on the other hand, we see tax holidays being given for certain companies. And also we see, as the Justice Mist himself said last year in Parliament, the phenomenon of misinvoicing has lost our country billions of dollars, $40 billion. So there's a massive inequality in our society. So I think the status quo is that. And the rulers in power want to maintain that status quo at any cost. So when we speak against it, we may be branded as terrorist, if we
drug addicts
or terrorists, and if we post things about them in the internet, which is on online space, we will be punished by law in terms of legislations like the OSB, Online Safety Bill. So that is the danger that we are facing. So I think we might have to basically protect our rights against all these serious pieces of legislation that are trying to threaten them.
Well, Migara, as you said before, this is an important election year. It's when people are most literate politically. It's when people are most outspoken politically. But all of that does not matter as long as people vote for the wrong people. So it's important for Sri Lanka's civil society, for Sri Lanka's intellectuals, for Sri Lanka's well-wishers to, of course, guide the general public on how they should vote for, and if possible, who they should vote for. So I'm not asking you to pick sides, but when a person starts thinking about who should I vote for, which people would eventually do, what do you think they should consider?
I think, Shalan, the political landscape of this country has significantly changed over the past few months. Basically, what were the considerations people took into account in voting back then is not the case anymore. Now people are starting to talk about the economy, why we are at this state right now. People are talking about the political elite. Now earlier, the characteristics of a political elite coming through vehicles, VIP vehicles, was a prerequisite to contest elections.
It was lauded, it was praised.
Not anymore, not anymore. So I think people should ask the right questions. They should question the political policies, economic policies, and accordingly engage in political debates so that they can make the right choice. And I think there's also a more serious responsibility on political parties to educate the people about their policies.
But do you think that would be fulfilled?
Let's hope for the best. Let's hope for the best, shall we?
Well, of course, hoping for the best is well an all right policy moving forward. But I think we should really act and take action to achieve the best for Sri Lanka, the best for you and I, and the best for this country as a whole, the best for the future generations in this country. Thank you very much, Migara Doss.
Thank you for having me.
For joining us on our program today. Of course, as was said before, this is an important election year. It's important that you vote for the right people. So start thinking now. Just imagine if you go to a shop and you want to buy a simple piece of clothing. How much would you think? How much would you check the price? Once, twice? You are now being given an opportunity this year to select a person who would lead your country, who would decide your future for the next 5 years. So go ahead to that election. Go ahead to the polling booth and be picky. Thank you very much for tuning in. Take care and God bless.